Welcome to Relevant Revitalization, where you will find out the good, bad, and ugly of church revitalization. You will hear from pastors who have been through the revitalization experience, experts in the field, and much more, all with the goal of equipping, encouraging, and engaging you, your leadership, and your congregation to see God-breathed life in your church. Now, let's get into some relevant revitalization.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Relevant Revitalization. I am Matt Coyne, and today I am excited to have Jim Davis next to me, author of the Great DeChurching, as well as pastor at Orlando Grace Church, which, by the way, Jim, did you know there's like 17 Grace churches?
It's so confusing. We regularly have people show up here thinking it's a different church. Or we'll see somebody waiting for their friends out front and their friends never show and they get in the car and leave.
I could have just reached out to you and asked you the address, but I didn't want to bother you. So anyways, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
Good. Well, thank you for being on the show. I'm excited to talk a little bit about revitalization in your book. But before we get into that, I know I said a little bit about who you are, but can you tell us about your family ministry, your family, your ministry, your passions, hobbies, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, I can talk for a while on that. I'm married, been married for almost 20 years, have 4 kids, 16, 14, 12, and 9. So my hobbies right now are whatever my kids are doing primarily, but I have coaxed some of them into enjoying the same types of things that I enjoy.
Good.
So hunting is something that I've grown up doing a lot and have enjoyed. I've recently gotten into dog training. So I got a legit duck hunting dog, a British Black Lab. And it's been really fun, like really training a high caliber dog has been a lot of fun. Going to the gym.
That's a busy life.
It is a busy season.
We were talking beforehand. You and I have a very deep theological love for Disney as well, right?
We do love Disney. When we were pass holders, my oldest, who's now 16, I remember when he was in 7th grade, we walk every Friday afternoon after school, we'd go to Disney. And I remember walking into the Magic Kingdom, and he was well beyond like normal hand holding with your dad age. And his hand came up, and just from walking into the Magic Kingdom, he started holding my hand. I was like, it's worth every dime. Yeah. Like this is the magic here.
You know, it's funny you said. I was just telling our wife we were there yesterday because we're down here. Of course, we're going to come. And I told her, I said, I wish I could relive the first at many times in life, but at Disney, like the first time I saw our girls see the castle, the first time I remember specifically the Frozen show at Hollywood Studios. I know it's silly, but just reliving those moments are fun. So
they're sweet moments. Yeah. They're memories that we cherish for sure.
Yeah. Well, so again, you have authored a book that is, I know many people have read it in the Great DeChurching. So first of all, thank you for doing that. You, Michael Graham, and is it Ryan Burge? Burge. Okay. Yeah. I thought so. I just the work that you guys did. I hope you understand the blessing it is to people like me who are trying to help pastors, because we know no matter what season of ministry you're in, that having that support, having those people walking alongside you, whether it's in a book or personally, is huge. And so for me, I'm reading it in the filter of church revitalization. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's any secret that if anybody read this book goes, well, yeah, this kind of goes hand in hand. So my first question for you, because when I first saw the title of the book, I believe I was at the TGC conference, and I think that's where I think that's the first place I saw it. And I went, dechurched. What is a dechurched person? So you explain it in the book, but can you help us understand, what do you mean by dechurch, and how is that different from an unchurched person?
Yeah. Well, let me back up just a bit and say we never thought we'd write a book. That was never the intention. It came out of cultural exegesis. Okay. Mike and I, he's now working as program director of the Keller Center for TGC, but he was the executive pastor here. And so we're looking at Orlando. I moved back here. I grew up here, moved back in 2018, just trying to understand the city and how much it had changed. And we began to realize a lot of the people who don't go to church used to go to church. And then we saw a Barna study that claimed that Orlando had the same percentage of evangelicals as New York City and Seattle. And so we were thinking, okay, I believe the study, but culturally, it feels so different here.
Yeah.
So again, just cultural exegesis, trying to understand. And in that same study, Barna made the claim that 42% of Orlando, what they called the Orlando metropolitan area, the large Central Florida area, used to go to church and now no longer does. And so then it started to click from our own personal ministries that the people we're talking with, even though they don't go to church, a lot of them still have biblical foundations, values. Some of them, as best we can tell, they're Christians. Mm-hmm. So a de-churched person, to be very specific for the purposes of our study, is somebody who used to go to church monthly and now goes less than once per year. So and the easy way to say is someone who used to go to church and doesn't anymore. But for the purpose of our study, I always want to say, if somebody only goes on Christmas or Christmas Eve, or only goes on Easter one time, they're not considered de-churched in our study. So the problem's arguably much larger than we even communicate.
Well, even if I remember, as you said, monthly, you mean once a month, right?
At least once a month.
So I would even, some people are going, wow, not every week. No, not everybody goes every week realistically. I actually joke, if not a pastor, I don't know if I'd be. And that's terrible to admit, but yeah.
Well, in COVID, we got a picture of what, I will be the first to say it was kind of nice to be able to record the sermon on Thursday and take the kids wherever on the weekend. Yeah. And I am very sympathetic for the challenges that people face in this busy life to coming to church.
Yeah. Yeah. So I appreciate you giving a clear explanation of who the de-churched is, because I do think that as Christians, we can sometimes muddle the two together. Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't go to church, I don't care if you're de-churched or unchurched, I'm going to treat you the same and tell you to go to church.
Right.
And so you talk so much about that, and we'll get to that. But so understand who the de-church is. Why is it important for a pastor in the season of revitalization to understand the heart of the de-churched?
Well, I think it's important for a pastor and really any Christian wanting to be engaged in the Great Commission to care about people's hearts. And like these are real souls, real people. And anecdotally, when we were in the early stages of this research, I remember I gave a 10-minute talk on de-churching at a fundraiser for a global ministry, and I was followed by Max Lucado, and Max did an amazing job. And then afterwards, there was a surreal moment where I had this line of people to talk to me. I'm a nobody. This is Max Lucado. I look over, and he's grabbing coffee by himself. And what I realized is, as people are talking to me, in the 10 minutes I talked about de-churching, I'm talking about their children and grandchildren and nephews and nieces. So, specifically talking about a pastor, since that's your question, in a season revitalizing, we should care about the hearts of all kinds of people. You connect that with cultural exegesis, which we are supposed to do, understanding our audience. The context in which we are placed. We should want to know who they are, why they're the way, what their hopes and fears and aspirations are, so that, in the words of Tim Keller, we can know the storylines of their lives and show them how that finds its best ending in Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, I would argue wherever you are, you should want to know the hearts of the people who surround you in your context. It just happens in our context in Orlando and many other contexts around the United States, we're surrounded by people who used to go to church and now they no longer do. So it should be our mission to understand why don't they anymore, to be able to bring the gospel to bear to that, but to also understand as a church, how might we have contributed to people, especially if we talk about small towns where there's not a lot of turnover in terms of the population. Then the people, there are people often who used to go to the church, that you're pastoring, the audience is pastoring, and no longer do. It's worth it, not just for a new pastor, but for church leadership to take a long look in the mirror and understand why. Because often what I see are pastors of these churches who are really willing to do that, but leaders in the church and stakeholders who are unwilling.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say reach out to them, because, one of my big things that when somebody comes to Rollins Church and I visit them and I get to know them and I build a relationship, at least I hope that's what I'm doing, and I hear we left so-and-so church. One of the things I ask them to do is I say, will you please go to your pastor and tell them why you left that church? And so that is just the people who went from one church to another, which is not church growth, but they went from one church to another. But those who de-church, it is amazing how pastors and leaders, the elders, won't reach out to them and just have an honest conversation and say, why did you leave? And go into that with an open heart, open mind, and open ears. Because I think if we're honest, we go into that, we might do that, but then we don't want to actually hear what they want to say.
Yeah.
And we need to go into that understanding, no, this is a person who left the church for a reason. I don't care if it was as silly as you moved the pulpit from one side to the other, you took the American flag off of the state. Don't get me started on that. I don't care if it's something like that. We need to be able to hear them out and not go into it with an attitude like I just had right there.
Well, no, I think this is, I didn't realize until maybe a few years ago how unusual it is for that to happen. I mean, every person who leaves our church, and we have had plenty of people leave our church, we have an exit interview. And it looks different based on if there's tension. Often if it's just somebody moving away, everything's good, then one of our elders will meet with them. If there's tension, I'll meet with them, or I'll meet with them with another elder. And our commitment is we want them to feel blessed as they leave, whatever the reason, unless it's a very unique sin issue that actually rarely happens. But we want most of the people who leave to feel blessed. And we just tell them off the bat, we just want to hear what were some highs here, some things you appreciate. What could we do better in your opinion? And then we report back to the elders in the church. And some of the things are like, that they're not going to get what they want here. And we want them to feel blessed. But it's not unusual for them to say something that we really need to consider. Yeah. And so here's what they said. Let's talk about this. And so I just think the practice of what we call exit interviews is so helpful for the person leaving the church. And then it's helpful for the leadership, but it's not unusual when we do that well for that person eventually maybe to boomerang back.
And I think if they leave well, there's such a better chance of that. Well, your research has showed there's such a better chance of towards the end of the book, you talk about how we should be having these exit interviews, and we should be willing, well, maybe not in those terms, but how many of these people, they weren't reached out to by the pastor. And so, I make sure we don't call it an exit interview, but it's something that we have started to do at our church to say, there's no reason to have this conversation. We should have this conversation. Yeah. And so I appreciate you talking about that, because as a pastor who's in the revitalization journey, I am one of the first ones who can tell you the last thing you want is for someone to leave your church. However, if it's because they can't align themselves with the vision, then that church is not for them. That I would say that's a healthy reason. That's okay. If somebody's upset because of something, like I said, moving a pulpit or changing from pews to chairs, then I think the conversation still needs to be had. Clearly that was important to that person.
Yeah.
And we need, if as pastors, we're not listening to the heart of the person, what are we doing? So. And
I will also say we continue, when you have a good, healthy exit interview, I would argue the chances of them connecting with a healthy church after they leave your church increase. Yep. And so we've seen that. We've seen people de-church, and we've stayed in their lives in some cases for years until they find a healthy church. Yeah. And I think it's worth it for the kingdom, even if it's not promoting our own numbers.
Yeah, that's good. I'm sorry, now we're getting off on the thing here, but I always tell people when they visit Rollins Church, I always say, I'm not a proud man. If you're looking for a church and Rollins didn't fit what you were looking for, you come and talk to me, and we'll get you involved in a church body. I don't care if it's mine or not. And when I mean mine is my local body that God has blessed me to be a part of. And so I think we as pastors need to be okay with, a person comes in or a person leaves, let's make sure they get reconnected or connected, wherever that may be.
Well, and I know you've said we might be going off track, but I think this is really helpful to bring up, because as church leaders, we need to understand the type of culture that we want to be true of a church. And Ray Ortlund talks about there's gospel doctrine and gospel culture. And we need to understand what gospel culture we want to have in a church. And this is something that's changed in me over the years. When I was younger in ministry, I just wanted anybody who came in to stay. And some of that was good. Some of that was naive. Some of that was my own, pride. But the longer I've been in ministry, the more I've realized, okay, it is good to have filters up as people come in to make them aware this is what you're stepping into. Because often they'll come in and they'll see it and they won't like it and leave. And so that's helpful, but helping them find a church, because there are a lot of churches in most towns where they could find what they're looking for. But the more we've had that filter on the front end, the more actually it's opened the door for a type of person who already brings that culture, but it helps us disciple people into that culture when everybody's kind of on the same page.
Yeah, that's good. We've all been guilty of that. I think of, someone's here. How can we keep them? What can we do? And meanwhile, that's not how we're supposed to go about it. So, but I think as we go through this discussion, I hope people are understanding, I know for a fact there are people listening to this podcast that have 15, 20 people in their church. So the idea of someone coming in, I mean, that could get you through a week. I remember having that, a couple visiting. I was through the roof for the next week, but I was often blinded by, how can I keep them? What can I do? Well,
and I've been a part, I helped with a church plant in southern Italy, and it was a small church. I think now it's grown to about 60 people, which in Southern Europe is a large church. But in many ways, to your average American, especially when we were in the days of 20, it feels smaller. But there's also this rich culture of sharing the gospel and discipling people. They're not in a place where anybody, the thought of other Italian Christians coming in is just foreign. So it's created this culture. They share the gospel, they disciple people, and the church has grown purely from that, which has been really sweet. They're freed up from having to think like, how do I get other Christians to come to our church? And I'll visit them about once a year, and every time I'm over there, I'm just like, what are we doing here? This is this is so sweet. And it is, and just to keep the sights on evangelism and discipleship. It's not just the American evangelical church growth model.
So simple if we just follow the gospel. So as we continue to go through here, my next question for you is what are some of the main reasons? So we've talked about how we have dropped the ball on the exit interview, or making sure that a new person understands this is the church you're becoming connected with and you're getting involved with, through, we have an introduction to Rollins class that we do. And my goal is I want them to understand this is Rollins Church. This is who we are. Are you in? And no offense taken if you're not, so what are some of the main reasons the church has failed at reconnecting the de-churched?
That's a great question and a big question, because we tend to think of it in terms of the front door and the back door. So, and even the front door can sound passive, like waiting for them to come in. And in some cases, that's a real thing. But I think the church in general has a front door problem and a back door problem. And so when we think about the back door, it's kind of some of the stuff we've been talking about. What contributes to people moving out of the back door of our churches? And this isn't necessarily your audience, but what is prevalent in American evangelicalism is, we want them to feel free to have this anonymity. We're going to have Coldplay and TED Talk, not say things that we think people might offend people, have a high value of entertainment. And what happens is, even though they do bring people in the front door, the back door is just as big because they're not known, they're not discipled. And so we need to really strive to know our people, to disciple them, what we call medium walls. Now, among smaller churches, the temptation, instead of if the church I described just now has no walls, the temptation is to have high walls and to like really protect our people from the sin outside of the church, not realizing it's in here. And so what does it look like to cultivate those medium walls? So in terms of reconnecting with de-churched people, I think first is just knowing them, and then really understanding, as we flesh out in the book, the de-churched are not monolithic. If your media diet is more from the left, you will think that people are leaving the church because they are the church is abusive, hypocritical. You find misogyny, racism, all those things. If your media diet's more from the right, you would think, well, it's a sexual revolution, progressive secularism. And while both are true, most of the de-churching is not either of those. Yeah. Most of it is more unintentional and more what we call casually de-churching rather than de-church casualties. And because the number one reason for people leaving the church in America today is simply, I moved.
Yeah.
And so when we engage people, having, I have like 5 questions. They change here and there, but did you grow up going to church? If the answer is yes, well, now I know they're de-churched. I'll ask, depending on the relationship, what made you not want to go to church? Who is Jesus to you? What's your perception of the church? And I can usually nail them in one of those 5 categories, depending on where they fall. And if they're what we call mainline de-church evangelical, all it takes is a nudge.
Yeah.
All it takes is an invitation to come with me. Some people need to be at your dinner table before they're going to be in your church. And some people, you're going to need to be in their lives for a long time. And many of these people that are de-churching just aren't Christians. And so we need to pray for even if they would call themselves Christians, we need to pray that the Holy Spirit would work in their life and bring the gospel to bear in their lives. Yeah. The last thing that I would add, as a church, we need to understand the value of embodied worship, like why we're there. Because some churches can tend to beat this commitment drum. If you're committed, you're going to be here and you're going to do that. And that just, when we resort to the commitment drum, I think we've already lost. But what is the blessing of embodied worship, and how are we discipling our people to understand that and then go and share that with others?
Yeah. And I love that you said, and you say this in the book too, the nudge, the relationship to the prolonged, working with them, and they might just be unchristian. Because I know in the culture I grew up, church culture, it's always just guilt them into, and I hate to say it that way, but it was guilt them into understanding they have to be at church. If they're de-churched, guilt them into, you're the head of the household, husband, and you need to do better. And, you'll just find the time. And I don't care if you work Sunday morning, you tell them. And it was always, condemn. And I think in your book, I strongly recommend and encourage people to read, because you have the different subgroups of the de-churched. And there's one, and this is embarrassing as I talk to you, but I believe it was the mainline evangelicals, but you tell me if I'm wrong. And it's like a
mainstream de-church, evangelicals.
Like 100% of them.
100% of them, that's 2.5 million people, are willing to come back to church today.
Yeah. If you just ask them.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of it's discipleship. So I appreciate the way you said it's not about guilting or condemning. But I had this is a couple of years ago, there's a woman that I know from kids sports, and they had, I think at the time, 3 kids in 7 different travel sports leagues. And she was asking me if we would ever have a Saturday night service, because Sunday is never available to them, but one Saturday a month they could go to church in the evening. And so I just kind of leaned into what are your long-term hopes for your kids? Mm-hmm. So let's talk and just try to understand. And I get it. My daughter's playing travel volleyball today as we speak. It's a commitment. And there are many reasons that I want her socially to be able to enjoy that with her friends. But even if I have no hopes of anybody with my DNA going on and play D1 anything, but just really understanding somebody, like why they're making the choices they are, and cast a vision that God has something even better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Cause I mean, one of my biggest frustrations to the sports is, I feel like as church, I'm always looking at the church calendar. I'm always, the community calendar, the school calendar. Now I have it easy. I have one school district I have to deal with. And so I look at that and I plan things around that. And then I hear, people say I'm too busy. And my first reaction, because I'm not a great person sometimes, is I go, well, I had this plan first. I mean, I was first, but that's not how we do it. So,
well, and so my wife grew up in a small town, New Albany, Mississippi, and she grew up at First Baptist, New Albany, and they have just an awesome pastor. Mm-hmm. And I look at the ways that he is engaged. There is, one city school district, and the way he's been able to engage there and pray for families. And it actually has made me jealous that our, in a metropolitan area that we span so many school districts. It would be so sweet, like one elementary, one middle, one high school, and just to invest there and pray for the kid. Like, there's a lot about that makes me jealous.
I mean, it's definitely an advantage of small town. I mean, literally the one elementary, one middle school, and one high school is
one
on the
Walmart
same building. We don't even have a Walmart. We don't even have a Walmart. I have to go 15 minutes to a Walmart. So we have one traffic light, if that helps. Of course, we have a Dollar General.
I remember when I met my wife, she was trying to explain to me how small her town is, and I said, "All right, how many traffic lights do you have?" And she started to count on her fingers, and I was like, "That's all I needed to see. I don't need a number."
Yeah, we have one, and people don't even always use it. So yeah, I think that it's important for people to understand, But then you have the other subgroup, for example, of the ex-evangelicals, where that's going to be a tough journey.
What's so fascinating to me about ex-evangelicals, and we use the term differently than some people would see in mainstream media, Twitter, or whatever, but this is a group of people. They have left the church intentionally. 2.5 million people. They have been harmed they would say they've been harmed in some way, and some have and some maybe haven't, but they've left intentionally. Yet 97% of them still believe Jesus is the Son of God.
And I thought that was a misprint. I'll be honest. When I read that, I'm like, that's a misprint. That can't be.
It's crazy. I mean, so these people, it seems like they are still Christians, but they've been hurt, and they need people to come into their lives and hear their story and understand them. And in some cases affirm, you should have, I'm glad you left that church.
I'm glad you said that.
But it doesn't mean you have to leave the church.
Yes.
And how can I walk alongside you? In the book, we talk about, maybe corporate worship is not the entry point. Maybe it's a Bible study or a community group, and with friends who are willing to slowly walk with them and empower them to ask the hard questions of a new church. Why would my experience not happen here?
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to bring that up as well, that it's okay to affirm that, to say, I would have left that situation too.
Yeah.
And you hit pretty hard on that in the book, that it's okay to do that. We so quickly want to defend the church leadership or the church. And, I just said 2 weekends ago, we're in John 9 and we're getting into John 10, and how, Jesus pretty much tells the Jewish people, don't trust the Pharisees. Mm-hmm. And I stood up front. I said, don't trust me. I'm going to let you down. I will. It's not a question of if, it's when. And so we so often then also put our hurt onto that too. Well, this church hurt me, so that means this is what church is.
Yes.
No, but we have to get to understand these people and understand the hurt is real, and the intentional, the casualty of that it's heartbreaking. And again, it's crazy though. 97% still believe Jesus is Lord.
It's crazy.
There's no hope, there's no reason not to have hope. There's still hope. And you read that in the book as well. So, all right. Personally, as we talk about the people leaving the church, as we see the de-churched, and we understand that, I'm talking small church, we're talking about the affirming, and I know we've touched on it some, but I think if we're honest, the church has really failed at that, of affirming people who have left and going straight to the condemning. Mm-hmm. Why is it so important that we affirm within the revitalization? I would say any season of ministry, but specifically right now, the revitalization journey. Why is it so important that we affirm those who left the church? And I want to make sure, and I'm sure you'll touch on this, when I say affirm, I mean to say, I hear you. It's okay. Maybe some situations I would have left for the same reason. Mm-hmm. So,
no, I think it's a really good question. They're kind of on the two extremes here. You have churches you have people, who jump from church to church, in the way they might jump from restaurant to restaurant.
Yeah.
But on the other side, you have this, and while we would use the term covenant membership, we use it in a way where like it's with one church for life, the way that marriage is. And that's not, we covenant with a people, but we're covenanting with the church. And we can, I think there's freedom for people who have tried and for whatever reason, this isn't working out. In our context, from 2019 to 2021, we lost 60% of the members of our church. And so there were 3 touch points that are flashpoint. COVID hit and we required masks in worship. Some people didn't like that. I had a church podcast on race and justice that's with TGC now, but it wasn't when we did it. And then Trump. There was a crew that wanted us to hand out right-wing voter guides in worship, and I said no, we weren't. And there were that sentiment went all the way to the highest levels of leadership, and so there were places where I wasn't going to compromise. And even though it became clear this is really we're going to lose people here, but at the same time, we wanted to help these people and tell them this is not that kind of church. Like it's okay to disagree with me, and we'd love to have you here, but you need to be okay that that's not our view. Yeah. And so sometimes just being clear. And for me, I feel like God's made me like a small town mayor. In my heart, I just want everybody to get along. That's what I want. And so it was actually difficult for me to draw those lines and tell people that is not what we're going to do here. And we'd love for you to stay, but you need to be okay with that. And often they left, and we would bless them. And in a city like Orlando, you can find any kind of church you want, really. And even in the small towns, that you can. It's not like I would really struggle to think that anybody in your audience is the only church in their town, however small. And that is a blessing. We don't want to be the only church in town. But to your point, it is important to be clear about what we're doing, what we're not doing, for the sake of the peace and purity of your own church.
Yeah. It's, as you said, more than one church. We got a couple. But no, you're right. I mean, there is, through the pandemic, and part of why I felt God leading me towards this podcast is because I think the pandemic it changed ministry. And the 3 things you said you did there were, other than the podcast on what did you say? I'm sorry.
Race and justice.
Yeah. I mean, I had somebody come to me and say, I want to pass out voter information. I said, no, well, we're not going to do that. And I also took the American flag off the stage and the Christian flag because, again, don't get me started on that. But also we did require masks at our church in Wisconsin. And I just stood firm on that. And there was a reason, and it really caused people to either leave. But I will say, I'm curious, did you experience this? Because we were a small community, but the only church you required, we actually saw people coming to our church because we were requiring masks. Because they were going literally to my face every Sunday, thank you for making this decision. It seems like you're the only church that actually cares for this. And I'm like, so it opened up a conversation to have with them, And so, to hear people say, I'm not coming back to your church until you get rid of those face diapers. When I'm at home, I'm going, watch what you call a face diaper, because what you're saying comes out of your, anyways. But,
the way that we began to look at our church, and you had people in different spectrums. So some people just left because of masks. I have some, there's one guy in our church who I love dearly who had strong feelings against wearing masks. But when the church leadership decided to do it, he never brought it up again.
That's
and I'm like, that's what it looks like to be brothers and sisters in Christ.
And we had that too. Yeah.
And so I do want to affirm, like, what a blessing it is when you have people who disagree with our decisions and will sacrifice to follow the leadership of the church for the peace and purity of the church. But the way we looked at our church, because we were making a distinct culture shift. We knew when I came in here in 2018 that there were some cultural and philosophical changes, but what we thought would happen over 8 to 10 years was kind of forced on us in a year and a half with all the things that happened in 2020 and 2021. But if the way we think about it, if the church is a sink, you have a faucet and a drain. Mm-hmm. And so we did see when you make a shift of any kind, or even a perceived shift, the drain opens. But like you're saying, we saw the faucet opened too. Yeah. And so for about a year and a half, both are wide open, and we're just watching the water line. Like, is it going to get too low? And then eventually the culture was largely aligned and the drain shut.
Yeah. Yeah.
The gospel culture, again, going back to what Ray Ortlund said.
When within the culture of just for us too, and getting off again, but you get all of our snowbirds right about now, I'm guessing, for the next few months. And so we see the snowbirds come down here, but then they come back up, whenever the snow finally melts. And that was part of what went into our discussion too, is, we have high risk people. And so we're just out, we're not here. We don't want to get political about this. We want to love on you and protect you. And again, that's a discussion for a whole other day. But I think to wrap that part of it back to what we were talking about affirming the de-churched, I think it's just important to say, and as you mentioned in your book, it's important to say, I would have left that situation. Mm-hmm. I would have done the same thing. It's okay that you did that. Or if we're listening to the person, and again, love what you say in the book, and we go, and internally we're going, no, wanted to take a pause and go back and listen again and really understand why they left. Even if it's a silly, and I know I keep bringing up, but it's experiences I've had, changing pews for chairs. Even if it is something like that, there's a reason that person was hurt. There's a reason. It could have been selfish, right? It could have been, but I think it's important to. So here's my question. And I didn't put this that I was going to ask you. Say there is a situation that you go, that was not a good reason to leave a church. How would you affirm that?
Yeah, I would go back one step and say all change is loss. And as pastors, when people experience loss, we point them to Jesus. So I want to be able to isolate the change and then connect it to the loss and affirm their loss. That's like, good. You've really lost something here. So we've seen people lose, as our church, as people left our church, they lost their friends that they'd been with for years. As the church then grew, then other people came in, it changed. As it grew, that felt differently. And there was loss from the days when they really knew everybody. And so I want to affirm the loss. And then I want to say, Jesus is here for you in this loss. And I believe that this is, we as church leaders believe this is the trajectory Jesus is calling our church to. And you can be a part of this direction and a real blessing. But I don't want to minimize the loss and the hurt that you feel right now.
That's so good. I explained it in our church as mourning. When I had a legacy pastor that I followed up 27 years, and a lot of what I changed, I reminded our elders, I said, they're mourning a loss. Mm-hmm. People are going to mourn a loss. I mean, it literally is like a death. And so, as people who left before I got there, who came back and wanted to see what was going on, I made sure I specifically focused on literally apologizing, saying, I know you were a big part of the Awana ministry that was going on here, or as everybody says, Awana's ministry while you were here. And I'm sorry we don't have that anymore, but there's some other really great opportunities that you could get involved in. And we would love you if you feel this is where God is calling you back to be part of that. Affirming, I get it. I get that you were upset that you lost that, but there's so many amazing other opportunities that we're moving towards. So one of the things we've talked about is a little bit was the hope that we find. And I want to make sure we don't just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Your book and the study that's done, it shows there is hope. People listening, they're going, there doesn't seem like there's much hope, Matt, but there is. And I'm so thankful that you included that in the book, because God's still breathing new life into churches. And so can you share a little bit, somebody who finds no hope with this discussion, where can they find hope?
It's funny, even going back to, like I said, we never thought this would become a book, but it did. And we're working with publishers, and they were saying, there's so much hope in here. How do we not depress everybody with the cover of this book? Yeah. Because and you can people can say whether they agree that we accomplished that or not, but there is a lot of hope. And I would say there's hope in that. The high water mark of Christian attendance in the U.S. was the 20th century. Yeah. It wasn't 1776. It was the 20th century. But I think everybody would argue we made it very easy for non-Christians to be in church. And there's good and bads to that. But the bad is that there are a lot of people who thought they were Christians and they're just, or maybe no, they're not, and they're existing in a Christian church for social reasons. So I think there's hope in that. I believe God is purifying the church in the United States in a way. And you look around and the churches on, there's exceptions to everything. In general, though, churches that are holding to a Nicene Creed gospel, and churches who are doing that in a humble and loving and prayerful way, generally speaking, they're doing better than the churches who are not. So I think there's hope, there's a purification happening, but also there's so many millions and millions of people willing to come back today. They may have left the church, but they haven't left the faith. 51% of the evangelicals in our study indicated they were willing to come back today. So, we used to think, at least in our context of, inviting somebody back to church as a relationship killer. Yeah. But if it's one of those 51%, and I think if you read the book and know your categories, you can assess whether they are or not. Often they will come back to church, and it's a relationship builder. Yeah. So we would see a lot of hope there. I also would articulate that with all the de-churched fruit out there, this season's not going to last. Either it's going to turn around, everybody's going to come back, or everybody's going to de-church, and there's nothing left in 2 generations. I don't think that's going to happen. But either way, this is not going to stay this way. And our goal is not just to get people in our church and money in the coffers. We know that the children of the de-church will be unchurched. And so there's a hope in that these are Christians, many of these de-church people, that we're investing in generations of kingdom fruit by bringing them back to the church that they were called into and baptized into.
Yeah, that's good. And it's true, the children of the de-church will be unchurched.
So, I mean, there's and you can hear that how you want. You can hear that and say, man, my grandkids are going to grow up in such a different environment than I did, or we can see the opportunity before us.
Yeah. There is so much hope to it. And I think I always say any human does this. I feel like we tend to look at the negatives. We tend to, I was just talking to a friend of mine about how we in the church tend to look for the things we disagree with instead of, well, you disagree with me on this doctrine or the theological issue, so that's what I'm going to focus on. And I always say, how's that go for you? How's that conversation end up going? So, there is hope. And I think as anybody who reads this book can see that there is a lot of work that God has set before us, and we should be excited. We should be humbled that He's called us, commanded us into that work, so into that ministry. Well, Jim, before we head out, I do want to, just as I say every episode, my goal for those listening is I want to encourage, I want to equip, and I want to engage you as the pastor who's in the revitalization journey. And part of that is my good friend Ryan at Promotions Guy. He financially supports us to be able to give away books of the authors I speak to. So today I'm going to be giving away a few copies of The Great DeChurching. And so just like I do every episode, I don't want to make this a gimmick, but I need to know that you're interested. So if you're interested, make sure you like the post that I share with The Great DeChurching, just so I know you're interested. Again, I'm not going to make you do all this crazy things. I just want to know that you want the book. And Jim, I appreciate, again, just your time. I know I feel terrible that you're missing your daughter's volleyball game, but please know how much.
We're dividing and conquering. I have 3 other kids that I was doing stuff with. I mean, anyway, I'm glad that it worked. Good. and I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. And I appreciate it more than you know. So, but before we head out, any parting encouragement for pastors who find themselves in the season of revitalization right now?
Oh man, that's a great question. When I was in the throes of the tension of we didn't know we were going into revitalization, but we realized when all this chaos is ensuing, okay, this is what we're doing. I remember praying in the shower, God, if you don't want me to be a pastor, that's fine. And I remember thinking like, maybe I'm just not that good at it because people are leaving in droves. And what happened through that prayer was that it became clear God wasn't asking me to step out of my job, but there was something about the idolatry that I think I held in terms of like my own identity being in a pastor that was stripped from me. That difficult season was very good because I can actually now enjoy being a pastor now, whether things are going well or not. And even when they're going well, not feel like my identity is attached to that. And I think one day, like my predecessor did to me, I'll be able to hand this thing off to somebody else because we're all interim pastors. But just so that, like asking ourselves, why am I doing this? And if we're doing this for Jesus and we're doing it in not our own kingdom, and we're doing it to the best of our human ability, then we're just faithful to who God has given us, and that's God's decision. So I wouldn't want anybody to feel prideful if it's going well, or discouraged if they feel like the church isn't as big as other churches, because the truth is they could probably bring their church to southern Italy and it would be a mega church. I mean, what large is even skewed in our American 21st century mindset. So stay faithful, do it for the right reasons, be prayerful, and trust God.
Awesome. I'm going to go back to my roots and say amen there.
There you go. Amen.
Well, again, thanks for joining. And this is Relevant Revitalization. I am Matt Coyne, and we'll see you back here next week.